everybody. Thank you all for attending and welcome to this meeting of the Strategy and Resources Policy Committee. My name is Councillor Tom Hunt and I'm the newly elected leader of Sheffield City Council. The meeting today is open to the public and I'm pleased that so many members of the public are able to join us today. There's no items that contain exempt information, which would mean the meeting wasn't open to the public. The meeting will be webcast and the recording will be available for people to view later through the Council's website. It's possible that Sheffield Live TV may also record and rebroadcast this meeting. We've received 4 questions and 1 petition from members of the public, and these will be considered at item 5 in the agenda. Please could I just request that mobile phones right on cue and that such equipment are switched to silent mode so that they don't disturb the meeting today. There is no fire test planned. If there is an emergency evacuation, then please take instruction from the Town Hall staff who are on the floor here and up in the gallery, and the assembly point is Tudor Square. I'm now just going to ask each of the members of the Strategy and Resources Policy Committee to introduce themselves, so that's the councillors, and then I'll ask the officers to introduce themselves who are also present here today. So starting on my left.
Councillor Douglas Johnson, fellow Green Council here and Chair of the Housing Committee.
Councillor Milesh Parekh, Deputy Chair of the Economic Development and Skills Policy Committee, substituting in for Ben Miskell, who's the Chair of the Transport, Regeneration and Climate Committee.
Fran Belbin, Deputy Leader of the Council and Labour Councillor for Firth Park Wards.
Councillor Dorndale, Labour Councillor for Shire Green and Brightside and Chair of Education, Children and Families Policy Committee.
Councillor Zahira Naz, Councillor for the Darnell Ward and also Chair of the Finance Committee.
Councillor Joe. That's £5, I think, to the Lord Mayor's charity. Councillor Joe Orton, Liberal Democrat member for Durham Totley and Chair of Waste and Street Scene.
Shafat Mohammed, Lib Dem Group Leader and Ecclesall Councillor. My name is Martin Smith. I'm Councillor for Durham Totley Ward and Chair of the Economic Development, Skills and Culture Committee.
Councillor Richard Williams, member for Standington Ward and Chair of the Communities, Parks and Leisure Policy Committee.
Thank you all, everybody. I'll now just ask the officers who are present to introduce themselves, and I'll start on the right-hand side, if that's all right, Alexis.
Hi everybody, I'm Alexis Chappell, I'm Strategic Director for Adult Care and Wellbeing, and thank you.
Andrew Jones, Director of Children's Services.
Craig Rogerson, Democratic Services.
David Hollis, Interim General Counsel.
James Anderson, Director of Policy and Democratic Engagement.
Kate Josephs, Chief Executive.
Greg Fell, Director of Public Health.
Thanks, everyone. Okay, so item 1 is apologies for absence, and as we've already heard, Councillor Ben Miskell is unable to attend today. Are there any other apologies to record today?
Chair, if I may, I'd just like to query on a point of order. Substitution of Councillor Miskell with Councillor Parekh. I'm not entirely clear what rules this has been done under. I appreciate that the AGM agreed in principle that substitutes would now be allowed at the SNR, which I'm quite happy with. There was something in one of the proposed rules about the replacement having adequate knowledge of the portfolio for the chair they are substituting for. Has that rule been applied in this case? I'm particularly conscious that a large number of people have come to the meeting on an issue relating to the Transport Committee, and it's slightly unfortunate there's no member of the Transport Committee present today. But, you know, has that principle of adequate knowledge of the portfolio been applied in the case of this substitution or not, I suppose is my question.
yes, I'll ask David Hollis to just jump in there, but my position is yes.
It was considered. I was asked to approve the substitution, and I considered that point and considered that of the substitutions, Councillor Perec was the one with the most knowledge of that committee.
Thank you, Councillor Otten. So, item 2, exclusion of the public and press. As already said, there's no reason to do that today. Item 3, declarations of interest. Are there any members who wish to declare an interest in any of the items of business on the agenda? If there are, please refer to the item of business and state what the interest is. No. Okay, excellent. Item 4 then, minutes of the previous meetings. So there are three sets of meeting minutes to take a look at. Meetings of the Strategy and Resources Policy Committee on the 15th of March and the 19th of April. And we're also seeking approval for the minutes of the first meeting on 17th of May, which is an additional paper that's been circulated. So taking the first two, March 15th and 19th of April, are members happy to approve them as a correct record of the meetings that were held? Seeing nods. Excellent. Okay. With regard to the first meeting of this municipal year of the Strategy and Resources Policy Committee, that took place on the 17th of May, and there are two matters arising, which we just need to note and seek approval for. The first is the addition of the following appointments to the Charity Trustee Subcommittee, and that is Councillor Naz as Deputy Chair, and named substitutes Councillors Lee and Riddler. And then second, to agree an appointments delegation to the Monitoring Officer in consultation with the relevant political whip in respect to appointing members to subcommittees. I know that sounds incredibly dry. Is everyone happy with those matters arising? David?
It's just a point of clarification on the need for that delegation. There was one given by full council in relation to appointment to committees where there are vacancies, but as a matter of construction of the constitutional law, that delegation does not apply to subcommittees. That delegation has to come from the parent committee, so it's just to replicate that delegation.
Okay, thank you, David. So with that clarification, people happy with the approval for those two matters arising? Okay, thank you all. Right, item 5, public questions and petitions. We've received 4 questions and 1 petition from members of the public on issues to be discussed, and I should make everyone aware that there are 30 minutes set aside in the meeting agenda for this particular item. So the first person that we're going to hear from is Ibra Hussain, who is bringing a petition to us today. Yes, and I believe we're going forward to the desk at the front there. Exactly, Ibra. And on there you should see the button, I think it's probably on the right-hand side. If you just press that to turn the microphone on.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the opportunity. My petition is in 3 parts, Chair, and that petition is 1 with regards to the opening of the reception of the licensing office. Just to update you that myself and the other trade reps have met, GMB and my ADC have met with the head of licensing and his officers, and we have arranged further meetings to go further into detail and explore how we can open the reception area, which is much needed. We had a very challenging meeting and discussion, and officers are going to come back with more options and also be accounting on how we can progress further. So that's one update. As for the other part of the petition here today, it's also on the additional independent approved test centres, and we need to explore that further. We've been asking that for some time, and that consideration needs to be given as well. But the main objective of the petition in its format is that the Clean Air Zone, CAS, is that before you today. I have had a number of people contact me over the weeks and months. One guy I spoke to last night, the driver, he applied in February. He has just received a response from the CAS team after 4 months that we've got your application and now we're going to progress it. Chair, that is very, very unacceptable. The resources provided to the CAS team, or the resources it has, is poor, is not managed as it should be. And what's happening is that the drivers are struggling to find vehicles which they can have licensed. With the new criteria that's come in its place as well, it's not easy to go and purchase a vehicle. The problem is one, the CAS team needs to be expanded. They need to respond to people's applications fast. The other problem is that the exemption period, which has then been given 90 days, it's not viable. It needs to be increased furthermore to give drivers the opportunity to go and purchase a vehicle and then get it licensed as well. One of the other issues is also with the approved grant scheme. One, the grant scheme is very low. The vehicle prices has gone up by 60% or more, and you're well aware that the cost of vehicles is high. So what we are getting for D-license is £4,000, and for the retrospective or other schemes, the replacement of vehicle, we're getting £5,000. If you get a loan, it's £6,000. Now, on the loans as well, that the companies aren't responding to the driver's queries, or if they are, they're charging 12% as well, which is what's happened is in all this, the driver is snookered. So what the whole plea before you is one, to look into this with the utmost priority with the CAS team and escalate and paying the payments to the drivers ASAP, because once the application is approved, it is taking forever to get the payments out to the drivers. That is absolutely unacceptable. So that's one thing you can take away. Second thing you can take away is also that the 90-day exemption is not viable. The drivers cannot find vehicles. So that needs expanding a lot more further than where we are as well. And also the queries and how the team responds to drivers, that all needs addressing, and I think it shouldn't take very long to address. It needs immediately addressing in its whole entirety. Also, the funding from the fines, which the council is now receiving, and it's in the press reported, if I'm incorrect, correct me, it's in the region of £200,000 plus. Now, if that's true or not, I don't know. In a month where you have gone live, my question is, where will that in a sense, money will go to be spent? If we are going to get pittance, in a sense, I think that money should come back to the drivers, because drivers are the ones in this, are the ones which are affected. They are having to replace their vehicles. So in all this, if I put it in a nutshell, the driver concept has not been considered, but you want the driver to fork out and change and have a clean air zone. It doesn't work one way, it works two ways. The council has to be much, much more forthcoming and come forward and address these issues. I think it's good to have these meetings, but at the end of the day, what matters, members and the chair, is that we get results. Results will matter. So I think everyone is very much concerned. The way the whole construction of the clean air zone or the whole project, I think it's not been thought out properly, but unfortunately we are where we are on this. So I hope you can take this petition on board. I wish Councillor Ben Miskell was here today to listen and respond on this. I know he's new in his post, but this is a very challenging time for all of us, and I hope as a new leader and the new team, you do take the whole matters before you and consider our request. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hussain. And I'm sure that Councillor Miskell will be watching in. He's unable to be here today or will be watching this subsequently. Let me just address some of the points that you've raised in your petition. On the first two parts, the improvements to the licensing services reception facilities, and I know that this is a significant issue for many of the drivers, and also the additional independent approved test centres. Last week, myself and Councillor Miskell met with representatives of the Sheffield Taxi Trade Association, and these points were discussed. I am pleased that you've already had dialogue with the licensing service about that, and that there is further ongoing dialogue around that. That is exactly the right approach. When it comes to the other issues that you discussed, what I'm going to suggest I do is that there are a number of public questions which all relate to the similar sorts of issues. To avoid you all hearing me twice, what I suggest I do is I give a response which covers all of them, if that's okay, because many of the points that you've raised are picked up later on in those questions. So they are noted by all of us here on this committee, and I will give you a response shortly. So thank you very much. The first of our public questions is from Nasser Roof, who's the chair of the Firth Park, put my teeth in, Neighbourhood Network. Nasser. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, councillors, for the opportunity. Quite simply, being born and raised in Page Hall, the ongoing situation in Page Hall is getting worse and is now coming up to the summing of a big failure in capital letters. An attack on an officer that we saw over the weekend, last week as well. We're seeing council strategy and the approach that's been taken by the council and the police and other authorities with regards to Page Hall is very detrimental, is not working, and the strategic direction of where it's heading is a big failure, and it's really upsetting for a person like me, being born and raised in that area and working in that area with community groups, and now watching our most vulnerable and our elderly suffer in such a way where they have nobody to talk to and nobody to express their feelings to. I'm asking the council today, under a new leadership, to sit down with groups like mine, which is Firth Park Neighbourhood Network, to sit down and to open that dialogue and discussion again in the wake of Sir Mark Lowcock's report, to sit down and see if we can work together as residents with the authorities to have a meaningful solution. And by simply throwing money at Page Hall is not resolving the issues. The issues are getting worse and worse day by day. So I would ask this committee to take some leadership and take some ownership of that issue and have a new approach and new strategy for Page Hall. Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming today to ask your question, and thank you for your work in the community. Let me say, coming in as a new leader, I want to be looking at issues with a fresh pair of eyes. It's clear, we all know, you know more than anyone, that there are significant issues in Page Hall related to severe deprivation and inequality in the community. That is not and cannot ever be acceptable, and as a city we can't keep on doing the same thing if it's not delivering for residents, and the people in Page Hall deserve better. I'm open to new ideas in order to deliver a comprehensive strategy to deal with the challenges that you're talking about, and I'd greatly welcome the ideas and input of yourself and from colleagues in the Firth Park Neighbourhood Network for co-designing solutions. I think that spirit of partnership and co-designing solutions has to be the way in which we're approaching difficult and complicated issues like this. In the immediate context, the Council's Page Hall Neighbourhood Service has created an 18-point action plan, which you may be familiar with, and that's based on feedback from regular meetings with local residents and partners locally. And that's to raise the overall standards in the area and to make Page Hall a more sustainable community. The action plan includes points around finding solutions to issues to do with environmental and pest issues, overcrowding and poor property conditions. We will make sure that you get a full copy of this answer so you can take a look at it, and then I would genuinely like to have your feedback on it once you've had that. The service, as you know, is based at the heart of Page Hall, and it acts as a central hub, and it's designed to join up many of the services that work in the area as a kind of one Page Hall team. I am clear, though, that in order to find solutions here, we do need strong dialogue with all local partners and stakeholders, such as yourself, working together to find solutions, to share intelligence and to ensure a joined-up response to local issues. There are strong links with local voluntary, faith groups and community groups, and those relationships are fundamental if we're going to make progress here. We do need to build on them further, and I repeat what I said, that I would welcome your views, your input from you and colleagues in Firth Park and Page Hall, and would welcome your input to co-design solutions as we go forward to try to find existing and new, to find solutions to existing and new issues. But I'll go back to what I said at the beginning. The situation can't be acceptable in its current form, and have to look at this with a fresh pair of eyes, and you've got that from me, so thank you. The next questioner, I believe, is Mr. Raymond from Sheffield Taxi Trade Association.
Thank you, Chair, Leader of the Council, and congratulations on your position, and respective members in your respective positions. Congratulate you all, and I hope you will deliver for people of Sheffield as your predecessors have. We are here because we are concerned the way the clean air zone and generally regarding tax issues, which I've already sort of sent to yourselves, and I've been asked not to go for some of the questions because of the legality, and I had no intention of going through all 21 questions. But it's important that the voices of taxi drivers are heard. These are residents of Sheffield. Quality of air is important to everyone, and from the onset, these drivers, we took a consultation with our members, over 100 turned up, and we come up with a solution for Sheffield. And it's a shame, it's actually sad, and it's concerning as well. Had the council listened to us back in 2016, 2017, 2018, and I've got email trails of all this, it's all in emails, and various meetings with various members. Some members are sat here as well, giving a solution. The solution was always reloading taxis. And you put stop to it all the way until after the Clean Air Zone has been implemented. Now you give us 3 months from February to replace our vehicles with these vehicles that are cheaper to buy. Well, they were cheaper to buy. They still are, I would say, cheaper to buy. Are they affordable anymore? Not really. Now, these vehicles, had the council listened to us from the onset, and there was good feedback, whoever I met privately, all 3 parties. I can remember meeting the Greens, yourself on 2 occasions. I remember meeting the Lib Dems and Labour members as well. They all were okay on the idea. No one really rejected, but there were some concerns raised about wheelchair users. And I said, look, this is the type of vehicle that wheelchair users purchase for their personal use. So why would they be concerned? And it's a better journey for passengers, and it's value for money for drivers. Now those particular vehicles, then pre-COVID, they were retailing brand new from £18,000 to £25,000. Now that same vehicle is now near enough £40,000, around 38,000. Now you've burdened us with 2 things. Yeah, we've gave you solutions. You've not stick to them. Now you want us. How is that? How is that fair? How is that democratic? How is that, fair on these drivers? These drivers, we are not militant. We don't do these kind of things, and it just shows, the support. It's not support for me, it's support for their livelihoods. So it's not just these individual drivers like myself and my fellow drivers, it's our families. Many drivers have already moved over, they've gone to different occupations where they can. There are many drivers who moved over to private hire. So we started off with 858 cabs at one point, officially 857. Now that's near enough 500, all the way down to 500. And that number would dwindle because many of these drivers can't afford to replace their vehicles. Many of these drivers have been excluded because of conditions, and every time we raised concerns about those conditions, we never got a reply. And it's always been a delay tactic. Yeah, we'll delay, and eventually we'll have another meeting with them. Oh yeah, we forgot about that. We forgot to do this. That's the kind of attitude we've had. So we are asking for you, in relation to CAS, is to delay. I mean, if you ask these drivers, they want cancelled altogether, but you members are telling us, look, we can't cancel, we've taken the money from the government. But what we're asking for is at least be sensible, at least be fair. Give us an exemption until next year, 2024, June 2024. That's what we're asking for. And hopefully that will give you a cleaner fleet, will become affordable as well, because some of the used vehicles, their prices are now retailing at the price of what we would purchase brand new. And you agreed with it then. For example, a 2018 vehicle, which my brother just purchased, cost him just over 20,000. Had it been 4 years ago, pre-COVID, he would have brand new for 20,000. So this is the kind of pressure you put us under. And he's not eligible for the grant because of 1 year rule. He's one of those that's stuck in there. And then there's another chap here, Nisar, an older gentleman who wants to replace his vehicle with the Euro 5 and get it retrofitted. He's also been excluded because it's been under a year. So your conditions are not fair, and we've never ever had a satisfactory answer from the team, because they've just had this bullish behaviour towards the scheme. You know, we have to do this, we've got no choice. You know, what's the point of consultation, you know, if the council and the officers aren't listening? So we are requesting two things. Again, extend this exemption period for taxi drivers until next year, June next year, and also look at the handling of the CAS team altogether. You know, is this right? Have they done their jobs right? Have they done their due diligence? I mean, I've given an example in there when we talked about the reloading vehicles and the availability. So the officer comes back with, oh, there's over 700 vehicles. I've checked, there's not. So maybe misunderstanding on behalf of the officers, maybe misunderstanding on behalf of the person who gave them that information. Maybe. Then I could, no, it's not. Then he comes back with me, oh, there's 70 vehicles available with one supplier. And I've emailed, we've done a step purchase, and I've sent, and I've attached, I don't know if it come with this, I did attach an email. They've only got about 20, not even that, brand new, and they only had 2 at the time of phone call, they only had 2 used vehicles. So again, you know, that's your evidence for this information. I think that's in itself is enough to ring those alarm bells, to try and ask for the, to try and implement some kind of investigation into where it's gone wrong. Because these drivers, you know, they've got livelihoods, you know, they've got families to pay, they've got mortgages, you know, to pay for. They've got families. Yes, we appreciate the clean air zone in the idea that we reduce emissions, but it could have been a clean air plan, just like Liverpool. I keep quoting Liverpool, I apologise again, but they got it right. And they listen to their taxi drivers. They particularly say in their statement, our taxi drivers cannot afford to upgrade because of cost of living. So why are Sheffield taxi drivers viewed differently? We're not no busier than Liverpool. Liverpool is a bustling economy for taxi drivers, especially in the evening. You go out to Sheffield in the evening, after 8, 9 o'clock during the week, there's nothing happening for taxi drivers. These drivers are waiting on ranks to 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours sometimes. Sometimes they've gone home empty, pulling off a taxi off outside a nightclub because there's not been enough customers. Some walk, student accommodations in town centre, they walk. So how do you, retain that? We give the solution, but you've not. So again, so we request that you extend this exemption, look into or initiate an investigation into handling of the clean air zone as a whole, where things have gone wrong, where they've not listened to us, where they've not taken on board. And that's the clean air zone, yep. So in relation to licensing, extremely disappointed with the senior management, whoever's dealing with it above the chief licensing officer, including in that maybe some of that, even the chief licensing officer at the time. I'll give you another example. So chief licensing at the time when we spoke to him about how can we resolve this issue about clean air zone, we spoke to clean licensing, he was for it, then all of a sudden he's changed his tune just like that. No, it's all right, we don't need these. Again, that's the kind of thing we face. So going back to licensing, so again, we have expressed our concerns in relation to opening of the office. Why not? That's what we pay for. That's what we've been paying for all this time. You know, it's supposed to be non-profit making, and any money should be spent on the office. Now, I'll give you our personal example as TTA. We deal with approximately 20 cases every week. This morning alone, I know 2 of the both here, I think. I've had at least once a year. Drivers, they can't even get forms. Now everybody has access to a printer at home. I've had to print off a medical form for one driver, which I'm going to give later on after see him. And there's one driver saying he needs a transfer form. He come to my office, so I'm using the resource of my office to help drivers what licensing should be doing. That's what we pay for. So please have this office open as soon as possible. Lessen the burden on us, and we are a voluntary organisation. We don't charge our members. It's all voluntary, most of it. It's very rare. We sort of, it's very limited what we claim, and I've sort of discussed with yourself when you had the meeting. It's unfair, and it's unfair on these guys. They have to wait for me to go to my office. Why can't they just walk into the office? So please, don't, let this fall on deaf ears, because we need action. In particular, to CAS, it's been implemented from 4th of carriages, exemption finishes. we need some kind of decision, because these drivers, now that, you know, they've tasted a bit of militancy, they're talking about strikes already. They're talking about not doing home for school contracts. And that concerns me, because these children have been transported for a long time. They need that service. They need that regular routine. And by disrupting it, it will be unfair on them. And this is why we don't believe in militancy. This is why we don't take this kind of action, because we feel for the city as well. But unfortunately, you know, the way the conduct has been, with, you know, the way the whole conduct has been, it's led us to nothing but to do this. So please, just consider, you know, your actions, and please listen to these drivers. I can only plead with you, you know, decision makers and the officers as well, who, you know, who write the policies. Please talk to us. You know, we are organisation with a membership. We are a membership-led organisation. You know, if I were to ask these drivers now, they've changed their mind. Now they want the cars cancelled. You know, thank you very much for listening, and please take on board whatever we said.
Thank you very much, Mr. Raymond, for your questions. You know, this doesn't fall on deaf ears. You do an excellent and important job in speaking up for your members, and I know how tenaciously you have their back. I wanted to thank you for not only attending today, but for making the time available last week for the meeting that we had with yourself and Councillor Miskell. It was hugely appreciated to be able to talk through many of the issues that you've discussed today, and indeed that Mr. Hussain has raised today, not least the last 2 points that you made around the licensing service. And since that meeting, we have taken up some of those issues, and we have responses back from the transport and licensing teams. We will come back to you and continue that dialogue in the way that we said that we would. Right from the beginning of my time as leader, I've said that I want to hear from people about the challenges that they're facing. So I'm genuinely keen to hear through, you know, your membership body about those challenges, and it was hugely valuable to speak to you. The transport team have provided a detailed set of responses to your questions, which will be provided to you. When you've had a chance to digest them, I would be happy, Councillor Miskell and I would be happy to have that follow-up conversation to get your feedback on them. Let me just take a step back from the detail for a second, though, because I think there are some things that we all do agree on, and there are some things that are in the gift of Sheffield City Council to respond to in what you said, and some that are not. Clean air is a fundamental right. 1 in 20 deaths is attributable in some form to air pollution. You know, let us all be clear, that is not okay, and I know that that is not up for dispute today by anyone in this room. We need a society-wide response to this, but this has to be done fairly. It is, of course, important to remember that the clean air zones were mandated by this government, and the timing of this is far from ideal, not least because of the serious cost of living crisis that affects us all, and that I know is affecting you very much. This has always been in our minds. It is today, and it's why the Council and the previous leadership team successfully negotiated enhanced support and an additional delay of several months specifically for Hackney carriage taxis. Of course, this doesn't go as far as we would like and as you would like. We will continue to bang the drum for Sheffield drivers so that we get the best funding available from government. To do so successfully, I'll repeat that point that I made to yourself, Mr. Raymond, last week, that we need evidence. We need to build up a very clear evidence base for more financial support. And what you're describing, what we've heard today and over the last week, and in the press, shows the limitations of the government support that has been provided. We will keep challenging government for better support and bring about as much flexibility as we can to ensure that the best support is provided to you in the fairest way. As you have identified in your questions and in your comments relating to the petition, there are, however, things that are within the gift of Sheffield City Council. The need for providing clarity about information to do with the financial support, the need to respond quickly, the need for there to be a high quality customer service mindset, and the need for the council to listen to what people are telling us, what you are telling us, and to respond accordingly. And there are a number of issues that have been raised today that are of concern to me that I will be taking up with senior officers about this. It is clear that you and your members are not satisfied with the council in this regard on many of those points. So as leader, I will take that up with the Transport Service as, let's be clear, there is a clear discrepancy between what you and your members feel they are experiencing and how it's intended to be experiencing. It's the job of all of us to close that gap. It's a problem that it exists, and it's the job of all of us to close that gap. What I won't do now, or whilst I'm leader of this council, is make promises that I can't keep. And so I want to be crystal clear with you all that the government's Joint Air Quality Unit, which oversees the Clean Air Zone, has said that Sheffield City Council could not extend the exemption beyond the 5th of June. So that, I'm not going to say that we're going to be able to sort something out for this coming weekend. The Joint Air Quality Unit, which is the part of government which oversees clean air zones, has been clear with the council that we could not extend the exemption beyond the 5th. Thank you for coming here today, for speaking to us, for putting these questions. We will take them away. We will come back to you through your representatives, and I'm happy to continue this dialogue. Once you have those detailed officer answers in front of you to all of those questions, I would genuinely like to hear your responses to them to see if that gap between what is understood to be the situation from within the council and as you experience it as drivers, it remains. That's the kind of dialogue that we need to get into to work through these issues. So, this has not fallen on deaf ears. We will keep on listening, and I hope that we can continue this conversation. Thank you. There are two more questions that have been tabled. The first was from Zulfikar Ahmed, who I understand is not attending today. I've set out my response, and I'm happy to have that. And that's the ongoing dialogue. Councillor Mohammed, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I mean, obviously in light of the passion and concern, I was wondering whether you could urgently just write to government and reflect the views that have been expressed here. It's been recorded. I'm sure you can send them a link and just say, at least make the case for government urgently, because the next Transport Committee meeting is not till the 14th of June, and clearly the drivers up there need an answer. So I'm just wondering whether you're willing to at least commit to writing to government as leader at council.
Thank you, Councillor Mohammed. I've continued to make the case today and in private, in conversations, that the way forward on this has to be with evidence-based decision-making. I have met with the Taxi Trade Association and have taken very seriously what's been presented in order to take on board the evidence that you are living right now, so that we can then use that to make the case to the Joint Air Quality Unit, and that internally within this just yeah, and when I'm talking about evidence, I'm talking about the conversations of the kind. No, I know, and I'm saying that this is exactly the kind of evidence I'm talking about. I'm not talking about a big, exhaustive data gathering exercise. I'm talking about listening very hard to what is being, well, all of you.
Regarding evidence, who provides you with your evidence? Is it somebody that's aligned with what you want to do? Are you waiting to?
Evidence. This, yeah, no, that's fine. Yeah, this unfortunately can only work if we're able to just have a bit of order. So, thank you for listening patiently to me. I appreciate I gave a long response here, but just to be completely clear what I mean by evidence, it's about listening to people and then doing something with that information. And a suggestion has been put forward from this committee that we can make that case to government. We can internally be reflecting on what more can be done to improve the experience that you are having and to see what support is available. Okay, there were a number of questions that were tabled in advance that we have answered, and I believe that most of the points that people are raising from the public gallery have been covered in those points. So I will probably suggest we make a bit of progress here. There are two more questions. I'll just finish my point for a second. There's a question from Aram Hussain. Mr. Raymond, are you asking that on his behalf, or have you covered it in your questions?
Aram's not here. He's out of town, I believe. You did mention the question to me, but I don't have a copy of it, so I have no idea what he's asked. It
Broadly touched upon the issues that you've discussed, so we'll make sure that there's a full response provided on that. Okay. I think we'll... Yeah, we have the mechanism for these meetings is that questions are tabled in advance, and through the representative of many of you, there were questions that were tabled. So we will make sure that that response goes out, but this is the structure of this means that we can't get into a debate. But hopefully you all feel that through your representatives, you've had a chance. Okay. We are going to have to make progress, I'm afraid, because there is a lot of other business that we do need to touch upon. Okay. So, okay. Thank you all very much, and I appreciate. Okay, we're going to make progress, if that's okay. All right. So feel free to stick around, but there isn't a right of reply at this stage, but we can continue the conversation after the meeting. So, you need to come up to the mic.
Chair, in light of what's been said, I think it's very important that we do have an opportunity to have an urgency meeting called. I think you have a committee structure where you can call this meeting as a priority to address this one item agenda. So what I'm saying is this petition, these questions, or everything referred to that committee. An urgency meeting is called of the Transport Committee ASAP to address the issues being asked here today.
Okay. Well, this is the responsibility of the Transport, Regeneration and Climate. Yeah, and that will be noted, and the officers of that committee can consider that. Okay. Item 6 on the agenda, just moving through, is have we missed a question? Which is the question? We are, because of the amount of questions and debate on that one, I'll have to write a response to you on that. The short answer, if it's the question I'm thinking of, is that we are and will be liaising with the Mayor and South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority on the Excel Road and Everydale Road programmes, and it's currently planned that that will come back before the Transport, Regeneration and Climate Committee later in the summer. So make sure you get a full response on that.
Chair, just for the record, at least let him make his table his question. At least we know for the public record what his question was.
You want to come to the mic now?
Yeah, at least then he might not like the answer, but at least you've had your chance. Might be a better solution to his.
I apologise. I'll try and make it as quick as possible, given what's happened. Basically, for a number of years now, we've been waiting. I came and originally presented a petition over 10,000. Originally, when it started, it's like 16, 17,000 now. At one of the full council meetings 2 or 3 years ago, asking for some clarity with regards to red lines, bus lanes, and parking changes across Abbeydale Road and Ecclesall Road. Cut long story short, we're not any better off of what we were then. We've got promises from Lib Dems, we've had promises from the previous Labour Council as well. We're just wanting that pledge to be reaffirmed today, based on the new leadership that's taken over with the Labour Party and also with the Lib Dems and the Greens, where they stand on this issue, because it's important as businesses. We're suffering day in, day out, and on the back end of COVID and everywhere, all the other issues, our customers are suffering as well, and now business is really bad around that area. We need some sort of assurances that this is going to be tackled as a big priority, and we get some clarity given to us as soon as possible, and that's the shortest I can do it. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate you being quick. To the question that was, your concerns are heard, and the question was, will we commit to writing to the Mayor to discuss this? And the answer is, as I said before, that we are liaising with the Mayor and the Mayoral Combined Authority on the Excel Road and Everydale Road schemes. They're part of something called the South Yorkshire Transforming Cities Fund. And as I said, it's currently planned that a report on both will come to the Transport, Regeneration and Climate Change Committee in the summer. They'll continue and consider the development of schemes within that fund. They'll consider the previous consultation undertaken. They'll consider the voices of people like yourself and the passion that is heard on this particular issue, and it will be that committee that considers the next steps. Okay. Thank you all. The next item on the agenda, retirement of staff. The report in front of us details 64 members of staff who've recently retired from the council with over 20 years service. And it's worth noting that there's many staff noted in the report who've got well over 20 years service, including several who've served the council for a frankly astonishing 50 years. And Strategy and Resources Policy Committee are asked to convey the council's thanks for their work, to extend our best wishes for their future and a long, happy retirement, and request that an appropriate extract of the committee resolution under what's called the common seal of the council be forwarded to them. So with your approval, we will do that. Thank you all. Item 7 is the work programme, and the presenting officer for this will be Craig from Democratic Services. Craig.
Thank you, Chair. The committee have got a copy of the up-to-date work programme. That's page 49 of the pack. You're asked to do a number of things. You're asked to approve the proposed additions and amendments to the work programme. They are detailed in Appendix 1, and that's on page 52. Agree the steer on cross-cutting issues, which is on page 53. And note the referrals from council, of which there are 1 in respect of the street tree inquiry, and to note that a report on that issue is coming to the next meeting on the 19th of June. And then just to mention, since the report has been circulated, arrangements have been made for an additional meeting of this committee on the 28th of June to consider the Coen Brothers item, and that's to give us more time and space for the street tree inquiry report on the 19th. There's also going to be an extraordinary meeting on the 2nd of August to discuss the local plan. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Craig. And I guess it's also worth noting that last week members of this committee and the council senior leadership team had a very positive away day and planning session, and we'll hear more about that later in the meeting, but it's a lot of our discussions last week will lead to work being added to the work programme in due course. Are there any members who wish to speak on this particular item? Councillor Otton.
Thanks, Chair. A couple of things on the work programme. One, the issue, sorry if I've missed it, of greater devolution to the LACs. I'm not sure if that sits with us or with the governance committee, but and I don't particularly care where, as long as somebody takes it up and makes it happen. The second question, I'm conscious there's an item on today's agenda, which is, I think, broadly speaking, a health matter. And I suppose the question is, can health questions not go to a dedicated health policy committee? I appreciate health is split over 2 committees, and perhaps that is a problem, but is it not in our gift? I mean, obviously we should take the one we've got in front of us today, but is it not in our gift in future to say, can health papers go to adult health and social care, for example, as the default, I suppose, rather than them all coming here? Bearing in mind, I think that members of that committee might have a better grasp of those issues even than the honourable members here.
Okay, David, I think you wanted, or James, you indicated.
Thanks, Chair. So on those 2 points, the devolution to LACs, we had a work planning session yesterday with members of the Governance Committee, and it will be included as part of the work programme for the Governance Committee. The second point regarding cross-cutting issues of the type of the all-age autism strategy, which is on today's agenda, we have included in the work programme a new table which sets out forthcoming cross-cutting decisions with a suggestion as to which committee should take those. And there is one, I think, a commissioning or procurement decision that is coming up that we have suggested would be best heard by the Adult Health and Social Care Committee, but with appropriate briefing of the other committees who have an interest in that particular matter. And that's a mechanism that we'll seek to utilise more in future to avoid things getting sucked up, as it were, to this committee where they are cross-cutting, but might sit with one of the other committees. Thank you.
Councillor Johnson, then Councillor Argentia.
Sorry. Yeah. Just on this one, this autism strategy that we have today has actually gone to both adult and children and the Health and Wellbeing Board, but it was felt that because it was cross-cutting, that we were advised by legal that it had to come here, and that's why it's here. So adults, children and the Health and Wellbeing Board have all I've had this presentation at least 3 times already.
And if I can just add to that, I mean, I think there's a bit of a transition of where we were to where we are now, and so it makes sense for the autism strategy to be in front of us today. But in future, this is the sort of thing that we could have dealt with by one committee. And just looking on the work plan for what's listed for July, though, I just wonder if we should have some consideration, not necessarily for deciding day, but things like the local land charges fee increases sounds like just the sort of thing the Finance Committee would want to do rather than having to take up time on this committee. But, I mean, also things like the Household Support Fund, which appreciates is cross-cutting, but if it cross-cuts just across 2 committees, then there must be a scope for one or the other of those committees taking it forward to sponsor. So, I mean, there's a number of things that relate particularly to the work of communities, which could quite possibly be appropriated to the Communities, Parks and Leisure Committee. So the Household Support Fund one would be in that category, I think, and possibly the Community Champions Peer Engagement Programme. That might be something to pick up later on, but I just want to flag those as we're having discussion on them.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think they're useful points, and we can pick them up in the pre-meetings, pre-agenda meetings before our next set of meetings. Okay, I don't see anyone else wishing to speak on this, so the report contains some recommendations for approval. Are we all agreed? Okay, thank you all. Right, moving on then to item 8, the strategic framework for the municipal year 2023-24. And I believe we have a presentation. James, is this yourself?
Yeah.
Yeah. Perhaps if you could just, for people watching, just remind people of your full title. Thanks, James.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm James Henderson. I'm Director of Policy and Democratic Engagement. So the paper in front of the committee today seeks to provide members of the committee with a summary of some of the key issues and opportunities facing Sheffield City Council over the next 12 months. It also sets out some of the areas of progress that have been made by the Council following the publication of the Corporate Delivery Plan last year, and those include sustained improvement on performance of key services, our response to the cost of living crisis, which has seen over £15 million distributed to families and communities across the city, the ongoing development of the city centre and proposals for neighbourhood regeneration, including at Attercliffe Waterside, the successful move over the last year to the committee system and the subsequent 6-month review of the committee system, which was reported to the annual general meeting, the work to implement and embed the local area committees, and the reception and response to some major external reports for the council. So that includes the Race Equality Commission report, the Local Government Association peer review, and the LOCOT report into the Street Trees inquiry. And the last year has also seen us both set a balanced budget and develop important parts of the strategic framework for the organisation, for example, in adult health and social care. So the report sets out some of those areas of progress over the last year, but it also emphasises that the last year was only the start of the journey towards becoming the organisation that we need to become as the City Council that works for the people of Sheffield, and the transformation that is required to get us to that point. So the paper sets out some details about the Future Sheffield programme and the values that the organisation has set for itself. So that's about the how we go about things as well as what we're doing. So those values are openness and honesty are important to us. Together we get things done, and people are at the heart of what we do. Thanks, Kate. Straight out my head. And the Future Sheffield programme is intended to embed those values, is intended to identify some key rapid improvement work for the organisation, as well as setting out plans for longer term transformational change to become the sort of organisation that we want to do. And one of the recommendations of this report is for Strategy and Resources Committee to consider establishing a task and finish group under the leadership of the Deputy Leader to provide member input and oversight of the Future Sheffield programme. The paper also sets out some key areas that the Council and the Strategy and Resources Committee will need to consider for the coming year. Those are both urgent issues that will need to be taken in the shorter term, including some of the ones that we have spoken about in the work programming item already. For example, the decision on the marketing of the Cole Brothers building and on the local plan, as well as longer term strategic gaps that the organisation has at the moment. So the Local Government Association peer review strongly recommended that the Council sets a medium-term corporate plan. That's something that we are suggesting should be taken forward, and indeed the work that is already ongoing and that the Strategy and Resources Committee received a presentation on last year around the city goals. Further to those sort of two key strategic documents, the paper also recommends the development of a number of supporting cornerstone strategies around issues such as housing, economy, the climate change route maps, and a refresh of the health and well-being strategy. The paper also talks about the need for the Council to continue to respond positively, proactively to some of those external reports that were received last year. So the Strategy and Resources Committee at the next meeting will consider the full response to the Lowcock report into the street trees dispute, but also, for example, continuing to make progress on our deep-seated ambition as set out in the Race Equality Commission report to become an anti-racist city and an anti-racist organisation. The list that's set out in the paper isn't comprehensive and there are gaps in it. The policy committees are in the process of beginning to engage in work planning discussions, which will be an opportunity to refine that set of issues for the year ahead and to identify what other key pieces of work will need to be taken forward over the course of the year. However, we hope that this provides a helpful foundation for this committee and for the other committees to consider as it begins to work through its focus for the year ahead, and building on the away session that Councillor Hunt has already referred to that we held last week to look at some of these issues in a little more detail and to work through what that means for the coming year. So I'll pause there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James. And I think that word foundation is key, because it seems to me from reading the paper that this strategic framework is the starting point for our work this year, by no means the end point. That work will evolve, and that's absolutely right, and it will need to be done in conjunction with the Council's policy committees. But as we start this year, it is a plan to begin our work. Questions and comments from the floor. Councillor Dale.
Thank you, Councillor Hunt. Yeah, I think it's quite glaringly obvious that there is a gap in this, and thank you, James, for pointing that out. But there's no mention of young citizens, children, education or families in this document. And I would hope that that is something that we're going to be looking at our children and young people strategy this year moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe we'll take a few questions and then see if there's any responses. Councillor Perek, I can see, and then Councillor Russell. Yeah.
Happy to go first. I'm sure I was. Yes, thank you for this. I mean, it's tremendously encouraging, I've got to say, this whole paper. I mean, the cultural transformation which it describes, I think, is something that we have needed in this council for a long time. When I was first elected, I forget how long ago now. Not 2011. How long ago was that? 12 years. And I considered it one of the reasons I was standing for election and campaigning for my party, is that part of this, that some of these cultural changes were needed, and they're now recognised. I think it's very encouraging. I think that we can certainly look at the LGA peer review, the REC report, and the LOCOC report as three kind of cornerstone elements of recognition of what is needed to transform. And we don't, and of course you don't in a report like this, you don't go say, well, in the past we were all these terrible things. It doesn't quite say that. It says in the future we're going to be all these good things. And the implication is that we recognise as the council that in the past we weren't always all those good things. So I won't dwell on each of those points, because it would then sound like a litany of wrongs. But I'm just struck by one particular point, and I don't know how far the culture change we're looking for is going to be able to embrace this. Under point 13, a modern council, etc., where staff have a voice. And this reminded me of something I noticed when I first got elected, which I'd kind of forgotten since then. I'm sorry to blather on a little bit. And that is just how many people there are in the chain between the chief executive and the person who mows the grass in the parks. We seem to be a very, very kind of hierarchical and layered organisation. And, before, I guess, the 1980s, the whole world was like that. But private sector now no longer has all these layers. It has much flatter structures. And is that something that is possible to achieve in the public sector, the flatter structure, where there's less separation between people on the front line doing the work and the people at the top of the hierarchy, so that voice comes through a little louder? Because I'm not aware of anybody in the public sector quite achieving that. And perhaps is that something? Is there a reason we can't do that? And is it something we could try and do?
Thank you, Councillor Otten. Councillor Perek.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, James. I agree this is a really helpful foundation for the year ahead and the challenges ahead. Just noting the development of the inclusive economy plan for the city. So, as the new Deputy Chair of the Economic Development and Skills Policy Committee, I want to say that I look forward to our committee, and I'm sure Martin does as well, playing a full part in developing that agenda. Just wanted to say I know that our council's community wealth building work will be a core part of that, and as reflected in the motion passed at full council last year, I think this is something that both committees, SNR and EDS, should pick up again this municipal year as we look to develop our community wealth building charter for the city.
Thank you, Councillor Perek. I've seen indications from Councillor Johnson and Councillor Belbin. I'll take those two then, and then perhaps come back for some reflections. Councillor Johnson.
Yeah, thanks. I think these are absolutely the right topics that we need to deal with, so it's really important to get them on the work plan. Obviously, without prejudice to anything we might say on the subject matter of each of those, I'm sure we'll all have our political arguments over the course of the year, but it's important that we make some decisions on those rather than let them drift. I was just thinking about Councillor Dale said about the, on the face of the admission of children, as many mention here, which agrees is important. I suppose the difficulty we have is that we've got to work out what are the actions we're going to take, but I would very much hope to see children's issues running right through a lot of these issues here. So we need a checklist of groups we need to make sure are in there, and so on. And I was right on that because it's a bit the same with climate change. It is mentioned in 1 and 2 places, but of course, we will always argue that it should run right through all of these issues here. And so we want to bring that in. So, for instance, item 13 is about housing stock quality improvements. Absolutely important, including all the things listed on there, but it doesn't actually mention retrofitting, which we have in other circumstances is a really important priority for the council. So we want to make sure that those things aren't forgotten there. So that's all fine. On the inclusive economy, our point was that it's good to see that encompasses a whole range of things there, including culture, heritage and climate change. But I just want to make the point we need to be thinking more and more about, dumping the term of economy in that very traditional sense and looking much more about what some people call the well-being economy based on health and so on. And I think that will be very much informed by the Director of Public Health report, which is coming next, which really focuses on that and recognising of health issues being absolutely integral to the economic well-being of the city. So I'll just leave it there with those comments. I'm happy to endorse that from our side.
Thanks, Councillor Johnson. Councillor Belbin.
Yes, more thanks for the document, which I think is broadly comprehensive, though as colleagues have referred to, it's always good, and I think you're right to say this is a living document that needs to, we will be developing as we go through. I think the element I wanted to focus on is covered a little bit through the item on Future Sheffield and the cultural change, which again Councillor Otten has referred to as well. I do think that the change that we want to see here isn't something that we're probably going to be able to measure ourselves within this room. It's a change that's going to be measured by the people of Sheffield, by the workforce of the council, and by a whole range of other people who are watching what we do. So I'm pleased to see it in here. I think it's something we need to think about as we develop both the Future Sheffield programme, and I think the Task and Finish group along that is a great idea, but thinking all the way through the implementation of this programme about how are we getting public feedback, recognising that we are more open, that we are more transparent, and I think that's something we need to keep coming back to throughout the development of this plan, that we're not just marking our own homework, but that we're getting feedback that might include through our local area committees, and how do we feed documents like this to our local area committees and get public feedback like this way, because people shouldn't have to come to the chamber to intervene and have discussions about these kinds of issues. And I don't think local area committees are the only way either. Our digital offer in terms of digital interaction, but I would like to see that threaded throughout the discussions that we continue to have on this throughout the year.
Thank you, Councillor Belbin. I'll come back to James for some reflections, I think, on a range of points, or perhaps from the Chief Executive.
Thank you, Councillor Hart. Thank you, members, for those questions and reflections. Just sort of going through them in order, if I can. First to Councillor Dale, yes, I think we absolutely acknowledge that the voice of children and young people is not within this document as much as we would want it to be. Clearly, that's something that the Education, Children and Families Committee will be considering, but I think it's also something that probably all committees will wish to consider as we go through the year, as to how we're building in as part of our strategic of your strategic thinking as a group of policy committees about the voice of children and young people. So I'm sure that's something that we'll develop further as part of the work programming piece that we've got coming up. I know Kate wants to comment on the points that Councillor Otten made about the structure of the organisation, which I'll ask her to do in a minute with your permission, Chair. But just on the other points, Councillor Parek, in terms of the Inclusive Economy Plan and the Community Wealth Building Charter, that's certainly something that I'm guessing that the Economy Development and Skills Committee will wish to pick up, but I think that probably that's an issue that will go across a number of committees as well, and there may be, as with the discussion that we held earlier about some of those cross-cutting issues, I think that we perhaps need to get some consideration as to how different committees can be briefed and have input to that work as it goes forward. But again, I would expect that to feature as part of the work programme for the year ahead. Councillor Johnson, your questions in terms of climate change as a bit of a gap. I think we have tried to thread that in to a certain extent, but there's certainly further that we could go, and there are some specific points, as you've mentioned, around retrofitting, which I know are very live at the moment, and I'm certain as part of the work on inclusive economy, thinking about well-being in its very broadest sense will be important to that. And we've also got, as the paper references, the development or review of the health and wellbeing strategy coming up as well, which will link in to that. And then finally, Councillor Belbin, your questions around cultural change and about how we ensure that the people of Sheffield have a voice within this and are informed about the difference that we're making in terms of the transformation of the organisation. I think that's again something that's come out quite strongly from the various external reports that we've had about how do we really ensure that we've got a proper approach to engagement, involvement and participation that goes beyond some of the consultation that we might have done to date to really hearing and involving local people in some of those decisions, both through the local area committees and, as you've said, broader than that as well. So I think that's, and I know that's something that the governance committee are going to be looking at as well through one of the task and finish groups that are being set up. Thank you.
Thanks, James. Just sort of answer to Councillor Otten's question in particular, I think I'd sort of answer in two ways to that. The first thing to say is I think it is possible in very large public sector organisations to do really positive work around staff engagement and staff voice. I've seen it myself in former places of work. I think there is brilliant practice from all over both public and private sector in more traditional private sector organisations of both use of modern technology, creation, support and development of staff networks, and work to support managers and leaders throughout the organisation with the tools and information to enable them to support conversations that allow all members of staff to have voice, and for, regardless of structure, for staff to feel that they're able to have, they're empowered in their roles. I would also say that the very fact of having, as we make this point in the paper, the very fact of having a really clear plan and a corporate plan shouldn't be underestimated in terms of our ability to give staff a sense of real clarity about what they are being asked to do, which in and of itself is empowering and enables them to feed in and input to the organisation. That isn't to say that we won't look at structures over the course of the Future Sheffield programme and look for opportunities where there is potential to learn from other organisations. But what I'd want us to be doing, and I think the paper sets that out clearly, is taking our approach to change in a very holistic way, seeing this as a programme that needs to encapsulate culture, structure, process, people, very importantly, and doing that with members through the task and finish group. So certainly wouldn't be wanting to rule things out, but also really mindful that there's an awful lot we can do, I think, to improve engagement and voice for staff without having to make huge changes to structure. The only other thing I was just going to say, which links back to James's point and his final point to Councillor Belbin's intervention, is just also not to underestimate how important and helpful it is for us as an organisation to have this clarity around a forward plan when it comes to engaging the public. If we're able to set out clearly a plan for the year and give members of the public a sense of the difficult conversations we're going to be needing to have, the policy debates we're going to engage in, then it also enables us to be much more open and inclusive in terms of bringing members of the public into those discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James and Kate. I can see Councillor Austin, you wanted to just quickly have a right of reply on that?
Yeah, I mean, thank you for the answer, and I accept it. I suppose my question is it right that we are this hierarchical? Is it a good thing or is it a necessary evil? I realise I'm asking the supreme hierarch the question, so... but nonetheless.
Shall I come back on that? Thank you,
Come back on bits of it.
Councillor Otten. I think anyone that knows me or works with me knows that my style, and I don't know if you're trying to prod me there, Councillor Otten, but my style is absolutely about being an inclusive, accessible leader. And I think, you know, hierarchies do have value, but what we want to be clear about in this organisation is that our people are the heart of what we do, and that means everybody, everyone at all levels matters. So yes, we're very mindful of that, and I wouldn't go as far as to say it is a bad or a good thing. I think we just need to make sure we're looking at it in an evidence-based way and talking to our staff about what they think works.
Okay, thank you very much. And I think thanks to both of you for responding to the questions and comments, and to the team for producing an excellent paper. And I think whilst the officers have responded to the questions, I think it is worth pointing out that we, as the Strategy and Resources Committee, own this paper and the work in it, and it is on all of us to make sure that those core kind of principles and policy issues that have been highlighted today in the discussion are threaded through the work of this committee and indeed this council. The need for democratic engagement, the need to address the cost of living crisis as we have heard today, the need for spending money wisely, the need to do more on tackling the climate emergency. It is only with the significant buy-in from this committee that will be possible. And I think, there's lots in here that we need to get done and a lot of work to do. So, that's, I think, sets us up well for the next year. Before we just turn to the recommendations, I just wanted to pick up on something that James said and make a comment of my own, which is about our commitment, our shared commitment to becoming an anti-racist city. And members, and indeed members of the public who are watching this may be aware that last week, on the 3rd anniversary of his killing, the council issued a tweet to remember George Floyd, to state our commitment to becoming an anti-racist city, and to link to the Race Equality Commission report, which came out last July, and the work of that commission. And that tweet led to a huge response. Some questioned why the council had issued the statement, why it had issued the tweet. And it was issued because the events of 3 years ago in summer 2020 led to national and local recognition of the harms that racism causes, the severe harms. And at the time, the council in 2020 didn't just put out a statement about how wrong this was, it took action and it set up the Race Equality Commission. 3 years on, it is right for us to draw attention to that important piece of work, because there is much work to do to tackle racism in this city, and the council is committed to implementing its findings. The statement led to a large number of hateful comments, including racism and abuse. And I want to be clear here and on the record that most of those comments were not from Sheffielders, who I know will have been appalled as we all were. But as a city committed to being anti-racist, it would have been wrong to let this pass without acknowledging it and stating clearly that tackling racism, whether it's on our doorstep in this city or on the other side of the world, is crucially important. We're committed to this, and I can't say this firmly enough, that there is no place for hate in this city or further afield. So I think, thank you for letting me just put that on the record. And with that, I will turn to the recommendations, which are listed at the beginning of the report, and they are there for our approval. Are we all agreed with those recommendations? Agreed. All right. Thank you all. And thank you again to the team for producing the paper. So, moving swiftly on then, item 9 is the Director of Public Health Report 2023. And very pleased that we're joined by Greg Fell today. Greg, if you could just introduce yourself, and then you're going to introduce the item as well. Thanks.
Thanks, Chair. So I'm Greg Fell, I'm Director of Public Health. So Directors of Public Health are required to produce an annual report every year. You've got the near final version of the report in your pack, and I shall come on to the reason why in just a minute, and a very short cover paper. The theme of the report this year is lessons from the pandemic. I'll start with some bad news. There will be another pandemic. I don't know when, don't know where, but there will be another one, so it's important that we learn the lessons from this one. There are unusual note of tribute. I want to say three things by way of kind of the preamble. A personal thanks to those who kept the city running, those who protected those who needed support, and those who protected and cared for those who were made ill all of that saved lives, and that really, really matters. So thank you to all of those who did that. Thank you to those, odd words, but 1,400 people lost their lives, and we should pay tribute to those and the loved ones they left behind. And to Louise Bruins, who was in my team, who was the long-time steward of Director of Public Health Report. She wrote many, many in her time. She was held in very, very high regard, and she passed away in November 21. Her husband is in the room, and I want to say a personal thank you to Louise. Did that without crying. So, onto the body of the report. It's in 5 broad sections. The first section is the health of Sheffield. There's good news and there's bad news. The good news is that there are many good long-term trends. The long-term trend on smoking is downwards. The long-term trend on infant mortality is downwards. Cardiovascular mortality is downwards. The bad news is that that's stalling. So the big news is stalling life expectancy, stalling healthy life expectancy. That's not just a Sheffield thing, that's a national and an international thing. And we are just about holding the inequality. It's not getting much worse, but it's not getting much better. That can be expressed socioeconomic and can also be expressed in terms of ethnicity, in terms of disability, in terms of those with or without enduring mental illness. There's no way of saying that's good, that's bad. So those two things together, stalling life expectancy, healthy life expectancy, and significant gaps in the city in health, mean that we went into the pandemic in pretty poor shape health-wise, and that mattered to the eventual outcomes of the pandemic. The underlying health state had a bearing on how well one did, whether the likelihood of being hospitalised or worse. And that's a kind of really important lesson. Underlying health matters to the outcomes of pandemics. It's not just about the spread of infectious disease. Second section of the report was about the run-up. Pandemic flu was number 1 on the National Risk Register for as long as anyone can remember. We had a plan for and had exercised the plan for pandemic flu. Most of those structures stood us in good stead. A lot of adaptation was needed, and the critical adaptation is coronavirus wasn't what we were planning for. We were planning for a flu, and coronavirus didn't act like flu virus, and there were some very significant differences, 2 of which were, 1, it was airborne, and we didn't recognise that until we recognised that much later than we should have, and secondly, a long period of asymptomatic infection was possible, which isn't the same with flu. This all kicked off in December 2019. I had an email from someone in Public Health England, as was. You might want to watch this one, Greg. The judgment is this the one? And WHO get hundreds of these reports every year, and picking out signal from noise is really quite difficult. By end of December 19, it was perfectly apparent that this was a significant event. We didn't quite know how significant at the time. And the early days were sporadic. There were some imported cases, some sporadic infections. It took off in February 2020, half term. Early efforts were hampered by testing capacity, and it's worth me acknowledging the efforts of both Sheffield Teaching Hospitals and Primary Care Sheffield in that, who heroically did a lot of that for us before there was what became known as the National Testing Programme, and lots asking me in January and February to impose a lockdown on the city. I couldn't. I went quiet. So section 3 is the epidemiological overview. I think and hope it's the last time you'll need to hear me drone on about waves of different strains of the same virus. And many of you have heard me drone on about that incessantly in the past. I hope never to do that ever again, but I will at some point in the future. The section sets out the story of the pandemic from the outset in numbers. Cases, hospitalisations, the impact of vaccination. I encourage you to look at the case rate to hospitalisation rate on the epidemic curve from about January, February 21 onwards. Really important to say it took too long to get granular data. It took me 4 months to get really granular data about a notifiable disease in the worst public health emergency any of us have ever imagined and envisaged. That's not okay. That hence draws my recommendation number 1. When we did get it, it really drove our ability to, 1, understand what was going on when combined with lived experience from various iterations of the coalface, could give a really powerful set of insight, and secondly, to really direct interventions, testing, contact tracing, vaccination support, a whole range of community engagement, many other interventions. Section 4 gives an overview of the local response in focus, from surveillance data, keeping the education sector going, the big P, big H public health response, what the voluntary and community sector did. Business support will go in there, transport, voluntary and community sector. It's important to say, and this is the why it's not quite finished, I've had some late but very insightful ads from various stakeholders, which I want to put into the final version of the report, and obviously the design work needs to be done. So that will be one bit that will finish. Finishing up, COVID taught us 5 things. It taught us about the importance of early intervention and prevention. We all now know what exponential growth means. It taught us about the false trade-off between health and the economy, which is very much a here and now issue. Even the Bank of England are noticing that illness is a constraint on economic productivity at the moment. Thirdly, it taught us that we've got a world-class NHS and social care system which did respond and responded really well in an unprecedented situation. Really importantly, COVID taught us that we've got an astounding ability to mobilise across the whole of local government, the whole of the voluntary and community sector, the whole of the NHS, the whole of civil society. We have adopted similar ways of working with respect to, say, the cost of living response, and we should perhaps consider the same in other complex, multi-sector, multi-stakeholder kinds of challenges. Last thing COVID taught us is that the cracks in our society mattered enormously. The impact of COVID was inequitable, and there's some important reflections in the report on what that might mean going forward. 3 recommendations. 1, data saves lives, and we need timely access to person level data within the bounds of the law, I might say. If we break the law, we go to jail, the end. So timely access to person level data is needed to enable those that need direct interventions and to do the epidemiology. We need that really right at the start of the next pandemic. Second 2 recommendations are linked. The scope and planning for pandemics. Usually it's a big P, big H public health thing, occasionally an NHS and care thing. The response was whole of society. Therefore, we need to plan and exercise for whole of society types of responses. So planning for comm system, maintaining education, job retention, robust sick pay policies is just as important as modelling, stockpiling of PPE and ventilators and NHS resilience. And the third recommendation is that kind of a statement of the blindingly obvious. The response, we can't ignore the structural determinants of how infection spreads and poor outcomes of that. I've said we went into the pandemic in poor shape health-wise. What became known as enduring transmission was largely a reflection of the fact that people had to go to work because the nature of their work couldn't afford to isolate at home for 10 days. So those kinds of things matter, and we need to get those things right. So ask of the committee is to note the publication of the report once I've finished the design work and once I've included my late additions, and note the recommendations that I've set out. Thanks, Chair. I'll pause there.
Thank you very much, Greg. It is an excellent report, and I think there is a huge amount that we can learn from this report to shape the work of all of us over the coming years. I know there's a number of people who've already want to come in on this, but I just want to put on record our thanks to you and your team for the work that you've done to not only produce this, but all of your work over the last few years to keep people in this city safe, to save lives. And I think we can all agree that we owe our thanks to everybody in the health services who've done so much to keep people safe in this city, and to all of the key workers who did so much to work to keep society going through the darkest days of those lockdowns that were a difficult time for everybody. So I can see, I saw Councillor Smith first, and then there's, I'll take Councillor Naz and Councillor Dale, and then I'll take another round in a minute. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the report, Greg. So COVID and the pandemic, it was horrible. Nearly swore then, but I mean, it's just awful. But if there was a positive to come out of it, it was in some of the amazing response and volunteering that we had from local communities. I mean, I was on, I think it was the RVS, I think that's what it's called, the voluntary, there was an app, and if somebody needed help, you could help them get a prescription, things like that. Is there more, or do you think there's any more that the council could be doing, bringing it locally, to try and foster and extend that fantastic response there was from all parts of Sheffield, to at least take some long-term benefit out of the horror that was COVID? Thank you.
Should we take several questions and come back? Councillor Naz, then Councillor Dale.
Thank you, Greg. That was a really good report. As the report says, COVID taught us the importance of early intervention and prevention. Clearly, there's a lot of work to do regarding structural inequalities in our communities. Overcrowding, poor housing, low pay, zero-hour contracts, all these issues are underpinned by poverty. We need to tackle the root causes of inequality. As your report says, death rates from COVID were higher in BAME groups. This is as a consequence of poverty, poor health and multi-occupancy households. How can we ensure going forward that we can change this to support households to reduce inequality and build safe, cohesive and resilient communities? And also, how will we address the findings of the Race Equality Commission, which highlighted the inequalities of health faced by communities across Sheffield? What action plan is the public health team working to address these issues? Thank you very much, Greg.
Councillor Dale.
Thank you, Chair. The impact of COVID on children and young people has been significant in multiple ways. If we look at young people's mental well-being, their social skills and emotional well-being, as well as their physical health and physical ability. So it's important, I think, that we use this data to help direct resources from a national level, as well as locally, to help our children and young people to thrive and reduce those inequalities. If I can just give some examples of children from some communities who already start in the early years with delay will have experienced further delay. And it's important that nationally we can put pressure on the government to be able to invest appropriately in the early years to bring our children, give them a good start in life. We also need to look at where we invest in our young people's mental health services, and access to those services should be made easier for our young people. And also, I think what we need to be doing when we're looking at the data from this report is looking at access to physical and social activities for our young people. Having recently met with other lead members from across the country, when we're looking in educational settings, we have children in the primary years who cannot sit for long periods of time because they've lost their core strength. And although young people were doing their Joe Wicks PE sessions on the TV, they'd not been taught to sit up for very long. So I just think this is really important, and it is the one space I understand that we've got data that we can use from public health to be able to influence what we do within our services in Sheffield and across the country. So thank you for this, Greg. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Greg. Do you want to come back on those comments?
Those are really easy questions, thanks. Councillor Smith, that's kind of capturing the spirit of the volunteering, remember it well in the early days. I'm not sure is my honest answer. I guess all communities came together because it was, at the time, unprecedented and very, very singular, and we were all scared. I vividly remember the early days, we were all scared, so everyone did pitch in. To be fair to the government, they funded some of that very well. Many things were true volunteering activities. Some weren't. Some we had to invest in some infrastructure, and government did invest in that. So we do need to think that one through quite carefully. But hand on heart, and honest answer is I don't think it would be quite as easy to capture that true spirit of those early days of volunteering in a sort of a rising tide type of context compared to what that was, which was a big bang, this is right here, right now kind of context. I shall reflect on that, and if I have any bright ideas, I shall let you and others know, but I don't think it would be terribly easy to do that one, I'm afraid. Councillor Nas, I agree on poverty completely. With respect to how the council and others address poverty, no easy answer, and I know we all know that one. The approach that we've taken with regard to the immediate cost of living crisis, which is obviously an overlay on poverty, is maximising incomes, and we're using a whole range of mechanisms, and I know you'll know the details on that one, to maximise incomes where we can. I don't have the figures to hand, but many additional millions of pounds have been, of what would have been otherwise unclaimed, have been raised and put into pockets. That doesn't solve poverty, however. That alleviates some of the right here, right now. With regards to the public health service and the REC recommendations, I've been pretty clear that we need to sort our own service before we start opining and giving other people advice on what to do. Therefore, we are doing that. Obviously, with regard to equality, diversity and recruitment, it's a pretty white service, my service, and that's not okay. So we're organising our own house before we opine on how we help others. And there may not be help that others need, to be honest, because the REC recommendations are pretty comprehensive and most people know their way through them and around them. One thing I would say is that I do think we need to be better at our use of data split by ethnicity, but also split by disability, split by other forms of protected characteristics. We're not terribly good at that. We're not terribly good at recording it. And it's hard to get real quantification if you don't do the recording. Yet lived experience matters and matters enormously. Stories and narrative matter enormously, but data also matters enormously. I do think we need to do a little bit more on sharpening up our data, but across the whole of the public service, not just the council. And lastly, Councillor Dale, I agree. I don't know the answer to some of those issues. It's important to note that many schools, early years, young people settings are doing some pretty good work. Not a recent example, but a while back I was told by a reporter that Sheffield wasn't doing very well with regard to children's physical activity. I asked the reporter to come in and invited those that were doing the work, and they reeled off all of the initiatives. So there is lots of good work, but there's clearly more to do, and I agree with you with regard to the catch up in learning. That matters, and we may never fully catch up, be honest. And with regard to children's mental health services, everyone knows that we underinvest in children's mental health services. Me saying that now won't magic up the resources, but we all know we underinvest in that. There's an ongoing challenge to this in every other city in that regard.
Thanks, Greg. I've got 5 members who've expressed to speak. So in the order I've got Councillor Agencio, Johnson, Otten, Belbin and Williams. Is there anyone else? And Councillor Perret, 6. So I will take 2 rounds of 3 and then I'll draw a line there. Councillor Agencio, followed by Johnson and Otten.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Greg, for the report. And it was it really took me back to COVID, and we seem to kind of have put it to one side. But yeah, especially the graphs with the different strains and how they affected. I had an eye on this country, but also another one where my family lives. So it's it was interesting to read that. I think, the main point of the report is the fact that there will be a pandemic. It's not if there is a pandemic, it's when there is a pandemic. We need to ensure that the city is in a better position in terms of health inequalities. So we need to build better and create that health in our communities, and we need to do it together. So any decision that we make, be in a council level or regional level or NHS level, we need to always think how we reduce the have and the have-nots, because if you're poorer in this city, but anywhere really, you die younger, you suffer more, and when there is a pandemic, you have more of a chance of being one of the people who succumbs to it. But also, I think one thing that we need to remember is there's a positive legacy, a silver lining of COVID and the pandemic brought us together to what our strengths are. There is also a negative legacy. Lots of people live with long COVID. Some people get better quite quickly, some other people don't. So I would be interested to see what happens in 5-10 years' time to those people and how they're doing. And I don't know whether capturing that data. Greg.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks. So, first of all, thanks for the report. It's actually really emotive in a way, taking us right back to the days of the pandemic when we were stepping through things, learning things bit by bit, which leads on to a point I'll make in a moment. But just in terms of what we do with that, I think the point is that this isn't something just for the public health team to make a plan for, but these are the key messages that should feed into all 21 of the actions on the strategic framework that we're looking at. It needs to infect all of those things, if you like, if you can use an inappropriate word like that. On the question of data, though, just my point was that this relives what was going on with the COVID Prevention Management Board set up in the early days of the pandemic. And I might have heard Greg mentioning once or twice about the problems of the lack of data. And, we have to recognise that it tied our hands for everyone in Sheffield and affected outcomes. The message here is that data is key and that there needs to be proper data sharing protocols in place. I guess that means that actually we need to give that message to government, to Public Health England, or whatever it's now called, and wider society. And I'm just wondering if it would be helpful if we as a committee ask Greg to write that letter formally to central government or whoever those bodies are, and to make it available on our website. So there's a record there that we're saying that, and that sort of puts down a marker in public so that we can be quite clear about that and not just reflect on it ourselves in Sheffield.
Thank you. Councillor Autism.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for the report. I'd like to focus on the conclusions and recommendations. I mean, the point on key workers was well made. Of course, we had a large number of key workers in the gallery earlier. We should have had more, but they didn't all survive, did they? Taxi drivers are on the front line, and we should bear that in mind, I think, when making representation to Jacko over what they're asking us to do. Taxi drivers, bus drivers, shop workers, security people were amongst the highest death rates because their work required. We required and expected them just to carry on and take it on the chin, whilst people like ourselves largely were able to move their work online. And that's grossly unfair. It's not, I'm not blaming anyone for that, but it's grossly unfair the way the virus picked on some people and not others. And economically as well, there was gross unfairness, wasn't there? There was, some people that just started a business and lost everything, and other people, were able to carry on more or less as before. And then in terms of kind of human contact and social life, it was grossly unfair in that some people could carry on their family life more or less as before. They could carry on their contacts at work more or less as before, just because of the way the rules fell. Other people, if you happen to live alone, you could be expected to go in enforced isolation for months on end and not see a single other human being. Is the implication, and that hit some people extremely hard, and that was grossly unfair. And I have to ask, and this is what I'd like to reflect on, because there are negative learnings, I suppose you might call them, that come out of this as well. Would people do it again if we asked them again? Or would they say, well, actually, the government's not following their own rules, and actually, I've worked out that you can't really enforce all this stuff anyway. And therefore, would they not do it again next time? And actually, did we get the balance right in terms of, you talked about the false dichotomy between health and the economy. Did we get the balance right in saying, okay, you've got to sacrifice all of your human contact because we're spending our transmission budget on letting that place of work stay open. And I'm not saying I have the right answer to that, but I'd really like to know, did we get that balance right? I mean, there were lots of examples that seemed a little bit absurd. One was that your grandparents can't look after their grandchildren unless they're registered childminders and you're paying them to do it. I mean, that sort of thing said, yes, the economic aspect of it is what's important and the human contact isn't. Did we get that? And of course, the next, and I expect we realise it, but not everybody will realise, the next pandemic will be different. It may be deadlier, it may be transmitted in different ways, it may affect young people rather than older people, it may be different, all sorts of things. So all the things that were right last time might not be right next time. It might be a different set of measures that are needed, but the question remains, can we get the balance right between the economic and the human contact? Is there a lesson that we can draw from the last pandemic in terms of that balance?
Thank you very much. Greg, do you want to make some brief remarks on that and then we'll get the final round?
Thanks. The questions don't get any easier. Councillor Agencio, the data point was well made, thank you. And again, I should give credit to Louise and then Chris, who did all the hard work on the actual report, actually, that set up that system. It did matter, and that kind of guided and shaped our response. That guided and shaped our response across the whole of local government and well beyond local government, actually. And when folk talk about health, I usually correct them and say, do you mean the NHS? And health equals local government. And I agree with you on the sort of our job is to make sure that health is reflected, just as climate should be reflected, and just as other cross-cutting things should be reflected in the functioning of the totality of government, local and national. And on the holding the gap, the Marmot report told us what we need to do and told us why we're not making much progress on the gap. And the Marmot evidence was published, unfortunately, just in the heat of the oncoming pandemic in February 2020, was the diminution of the funding power of local government has led to the stalling of health and the not narrowing the gap. And we should reflect on that. That is a national point rather than a local point, but we should reflect on that. Councillor Johnson, sorry to make you have to live through it all over again. I did promise that this would be the last time until the next pandemic, and it will be. And broadly, it would be the public health team on point, preparing for the sort of the big H public health aspects, but it has to be, as I say, a total society prep, exercising, and actually the response as and when it arises. And yes, it probably would be helpful to do a sort of a formal note back to government, because it's not just NHS data, it's government. It's a range of government sources of data. Of note, a number of DSPH having a conversation with Chief Medical Officer on this very matter, and it's largely to do with interpretations of the information governance laws and protocol. And Councillor Otten, on balance, no, probably not. Actually, one of my biggest regrets was schools and the impact that closing schools will have had on education and the subsequent catch-up. We did what we did at the time with the best of wills and the best of intentions, with the best information that we had at the time, but we will have to live with the consequences of prolonged closures of schools. So in that respect, and probably in others actually, we didn't get the balance as right as we should, and that's why we should take time to reflect very deeply. The next pandemic, as you say, will be different. The characteristics will be different. We will need to act dynamically according to the conditions of the time. But looking back on this one, schools and prolonged school closures was one of mine and lots of my colleagues' regrets.
Thanks, Greg. Three final questions, comments. Councillor Belbin, Councillor Williams, Councillor Perek.
Mine was just a quick reflection really based on the issue that Councillor Smith raised earlier about volunteering and the voluntary sector. I think, sadly, we lost quite a lot of volunteers as well in the early days of the pandemic, because a lot of our volunteers are older or more vulnerable. And it feels as if we're now seeing almost the reversal of that trend, where lots of people who clearly had more time to volunteer because they were furloughed or whatever were able to get very active. But it's actually taken quite a long time for some of the people who had become less active to be able to come out and volunteer again, though I think that is changing. What I think did shift quite significantly was the role of the voluntary sector and voluntary sector organisations within the pandemic, and Greg referred to, I think, how that joined up working with the whole of Sheffield coming together has really continued to an extent, and particularly in how we're addressing the cost of living crisis, and that joint working across especially the voluntary sector, but other sectors of Sheffield as well, has been really valuable in tackling the cost of living crisis. And I think when we are looking at prevention, which is the key thing, that we need to be doing to prepare for future crises and to reduce those health inequalities, there will be no substitute for the voluntary sector, in that we know that the voluntary sector was able to reach parts of Sheffield that other services could not reach. The resource issue behind that, as Greg said, I think there was a lot more resource for the voluntary sector during COVID. There certainly hasn't been very much during the cost of living crisis. And in terms of addressing the wider inequalities and addressing prevention, that absolutely needs to be more resource to go into our voluntary sector and into our local government sector in order to address those issues properly.
Thank you, Councillor Belbin. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I'd like to support and echo what Councillor Dale said about the impact on young children, particularly young children. And I know there was a piece of research done about the impact of the wartime evacuations of similar age group children, and the difficulties lived with them for the rest of their lives. So it's a very serious matter. Secondly, and under the heading of, he would say this anyway, I think I reflect on the role that our parks played, particularly in the height of lockdown. Can you imagine trying to go through lockdown without the ability to take a 2-hour stroll in the park? So that's an important asset that we should never forget. And finally, it's a question for Greg. You talk about the excellence of the NHS, and I totally agree with you. Is it a myth or a truth that actually it had been allowed to get so run down in its ability to respond to something like the pandemic? Is that an urban myth, or is it something that actually was the case? So we started from such a low base in responding.
Thank you. Councillor Perek.
Thank you, and thank you, Greg. You know, as the others have said, this is such an important piece of work. As politicians, we all know all too well that this is an unequal city. You know, inequalities have long existed on geographic lines, racial lines, class lines, and need sustained political action to solve them. What's clear from this report and the other reports that have come before is just how the COVID pandemic laid bare and exacerbated the inequalities that existed before. As we've already discussed today, developing an inclusive economic plan, something that stood out for me from an economic development perspective was just how the impact of the type of and nature of work was a factor in the spread of the virus. That 0 hours contracts, low pay and work patterns could determine someone's exposure to the pandemic. You know, it's shocking, but it's sadly unsurprising that the waves of each strain of the virus and the hospitalisation and death rates correlated so clearly with poverty, with Sheffield's socio-economic divide. So just to say, I agree with the others. I think the learnings of this report need to be hardwired into the wider workings of the council. As you say, we need to reject the false trade-off between health and the economy. I think both from an economic development perspective, I'm sure colleagues from across the council and all parties will agree, but we need to see that across every single policy committee.
Thank you, Councillor Brett. Greg.
Tell me whether I've got the job at the end of this. Councillor Belbin agreed with all that you said. I think it's the critical thing for me is I've seen a shift in the nature of the way that we work with voluntary and community sector funding, point notwithstanding. I guess our challenge and our opportunity is not to let the lessons of that decay over time. We might do, so we need to make sure that we hold our own feet to the fire. How we work with the voluntary community sector matters a lot. Councillor Williams, Parks, I agree. I spent plenty of time in Parks during the early days, so thank you for that. On the NHS point, probably not for me to opine on the rundown. It's not for me to say. But what I would say is that the NHS and social care system worked pretty well in a very unprecedented period where there was exceptionally high pressure all of the media reporting was clearly about the hospital's intensive care unit, which was the kind of the pivot point, focal point. But let's not forget all of the care that was provided in communities, which kept people well, independent as well as they could be. Yes, there may well have been opportunities to provide more resourcing to the NHS in the years to run up. I won't opine on that now because it would be inappropriate. At the point it was needed, it performed amazingly well, and all those that work in that system deserve huge credit. And Councillor Perek, yeah, agreed. I suppose the one thing, maybe this would be an appropriate point to end on, the cholera monument stands up there on top of the hill, if my geographies are correct, up there somewhere, as a monument to the 300 or so people that lost their lives in the cholera epidemic of the 1800s. After that, followed the Great Victorian Public Health Act, clean water, slum clearances, waste management, etc. Our opportunity to reflect is, well, what's the 21st century equivalent of that after a very, very, very difficult few years and a very unprecedented public health emergency? And I suppose it's for us all to reflect on what they may be, both locally and nationally. I should pause.
Thank you, Greg. That's a very important point to end on. And I think before we turn to recommendations, I think it's worth just reflecting on the tone of the contributions today, which are to really learn and draw out the lessons from this report. There could be a tendency to look at this and file it away. And I think of all of the public health reports, this is the one that needs to stay on our desks, uppermost in our minds as we're thinking about the work that we will do in this place. You talk in the report about there needs to be a whole government approach to improve public health outcomes. Well, I think, you know, that what we're hearing today is that there needs to be a whole council approach as well. And I think the other reflection on not just this report, but how we now sort of talk about COVID is there's a tendency to want to, because it was painful, put it kind of in a box and you know, think it's done. We'll have an inquiry and we'll move on. And I think, you know, I read this report and it brought me right back, and it made me angry. It made me angry about those injustices that still shape lives in this city. And unless we do something about it in this place, working with partners in this city and in government, we will be reading a report like this after the next pandemic. COVID held up a mirror to society, it exposed those cracks, and it's a duty on us to do what we can to fix them. The report contains recommendations for approval. Are we all happy with those recommendations? Douglas, yeah, you put forward a recommendation for the Director to write to Government.
Yes, can I add that as recommendation 4? And I was thinking, so perhaps this committee would request the Director of Public Health writes to central government to express the concern that data saves lives as set out in this report. And also ask that a copy of that is placed on the website with the committee papers.
Yeah.
Would that work?
It works for me, and I think we've already had an answer from the Director of Public Health that it works for him too, so we can certainly add that in. Okay, so recommendations in front of us. Are we all agreed with those recommendations? Okay, thank you all, and thank you, Greg, and thank you to your team for working on this. So, item 10 is the Sheffield All-Age Autism Strategy, and the officers who are going to be presenting this to us today are Alexis Chappell and Christine Anderson. Thank you for your patience today. So, I'll let you get settled. Ready when you are.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to discuss the All-Age Autism Strategy today. So I'm Alexis Chappell, I'm the Strategic Director for Adult Care and Wellbeing.
I'm Christine Anderson, Strategic Commissioning Manager.
So I'm going to do an overview and introduction, and then I'm going to hand over to Christine to talk about the strategy itself. So I'm really delighted to present the All-Age Autism Strategy today. I actually chair the Autism Partnership Board, and it's been one of my privileges to do that for the last 2.5 years. And one of the key things that I took on when I came into this role and become chair of the Autism Partnership Board was that, first of all, did a listening exercise with many parents and family members and individuals who are autistic, but also of people who are affected by the services and the support that they receive, or don't receive, in fact. And what that really formed was an approach to really changing how we not only think about autism in Sheffield, but also think about having a clear focus and direction for the future. And this was the basis of this strategy. And, you know, and really what we did was, in terms of taking forward the strategy, it was very much in line with the Council's values. We actually put people at the centre of all that we do. This strategy was based on what people across the city told us was important. And to me, that was absolutely fundamental in quarter. We listened to the data, but more fundamentally, we listened to people and what they said. And secondly, we took this forward as a collaborative, not only with individuals, but right across with colleagues across children's services, across adults, across health colleagues, across the voluntary sector, and right across with housing colleagues, and right across the whole city and colleagues. So that ultimately we did this together and we took a collaborative approach. But we also acted with openness and honesty. And we talked with the board about the data within the report and talked about the really difficult life experiences that sometimes people could experience. And we were very open and honest about that. We said, we're going to actually not talk about this. We're going to talk about the fact that people do have to experience waits for services, that they do have difficulty accessing services. And we thought we're going to bring it to committee and talk about it and take forward an all-age autism strategy. So for me, it's a very proud moment to present this, but also this is the very first all-age autism strategy for Sheffield, which I'm really proud of. And actually the Autism Act 2009 talked about having a strategy about 10 years ago. So, so actually this is really, to me, is quite a proud moment for the site to bring this forward. But crucially, what's really important is that we have very much co-developed this with people. And the recommendation is very much to approve, but also to bring 6 monthly updates in terms of transparency and that deliverability focus that I want to have to both adults and children's committees, and recognising that this will be very much front and centre of what we do.
Thank you, Alexis. Thank you, Chair and committee members. So as Alexis said, we've come to seek approval today for our all-age autism strategy, and we see this is the setting the scene to develop an autism-friendly city. We're very excited that we've co-produced this every step of the way and intend to continue to do so. The delivery priorities for the strategy align with the National Autism Strategy 6 themes, and our intention is to have 6 working groups with people with lived experience from the autistic community, as well as family carers and our other partners, to work in delivering the priorities on the strategy. We see it very much as an iterative process as well, and a very live working document. Autism itself is far-reaching, reaches into every aspect of people's lives, and we're learning every week, really, ways in which we can improve people's lives. So we're going to continue to engage with the board and all our partners, as we have done over the past year when we've been developing this strategy. We want to measure our progress against the themes and priorities, but keep evolving and changing. And as Alexis mentioned today, we also are looking at the structure of the Autism Partnership Board. We've just come from our Partnership Board meeting. Today we're listening to what people are telling us, and this is a very exciting start of working towards Sheffield's an autism-friendly city. So thank you.
Well, thank you to you both, and thank you for your work to get us to this point. And I agree, it is a proud moment, and it's right that we have the chance to talk about it here today. I've seen Councillor Argencio indicate and Councillor Otten, so we'll take and Councillor Belbin and Perek. So let's take Councillor Argencio and Councillor Otten first. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report, and we got there in the end, hopefully, if it gets approved. Yeah, I'm very kind of proud that we got to this point after, you know, so many months and so many meetings. And I do know that this strategy has been co-produced with lots of partners and people. All of us as councillors will have experience of casework. I have a live case at the moment where a single mother family are waiting for a diagnosis, and it's really difficult because it takes up to 2 years for a child to be diagnosed with autism, and the effect that has on a family is immense, but it's even harder when you are a single parent. And yeah, it's really upsetting. But likewise, I have experience of meeting with parents of adult children with autism, you know, they are still their babies and they are in their 50s and 60s. I recently met the mother of the first woman to be diagnosed with autism in Sheffield. And it's really kind of humbling to meet people that live with people. So they, you know, it's not just the people who are affected by autism, but it's the people around there, and how not getting what they need has a huge impact on their life, and it's forever. So it's really important that we make the first step to you know, get better at delivering the services. But one thing that we really need to resolve is how can we get people through the system quicker so that we don't let young children, particularly going up to primary school, down, because the length of time that they need to wait to be diagnosed.
Thank you. Councillor Autism.
Thanks. Yeah, I was going to make a similar question on diagnosis, but I think Andrew's covered that. But my other point is I mean, I understand that historically there's been massive underdiagnosis, particularly amongst women, of autistic spectrum disorders, and I guess a large number of people are never going to come forward for a diagnosis anyway. And so the question is, how does the strategy deal with that? Is there something in there to say, well, look, you know, we're all different, and maybe normal is a wider category than we thought it was, and we just need to be able to cater for a greater range of people, and what greater diversity of people in the first place. Is that something we can see coming out of this?
Thank you. And do you want to respond to those two questions? Thank you.
So first of all, I just want to say thank you very much for your support, and it's been absolutely appreciated. And the points you raised about diagnosis is something that's came up consistently within the strategy. And from my own part, is in our recent safeguarding accountability meetings, which we've just had over the last couple of weeks, is something which I've raised with colleagues in health systems, as also as part of the development of the strategy. So to both support delivery upon the strategy, but also to kind of consider the waiting times and the impact that has on families, you know, and particularly it's one of the key priorities I've requested that also comes through the safeguarding both children and adults, which I've appraised members of as well. And hopefully people who are hopefully seeing this today who are in the same circumstances will see that this has been taken seriously, and it's something that we need to address, and it's been taken forward. And certainly I'm going to bring Christine in, particularly for those who don't have a diagnosis, but particularly for women. It certainly is an issue that we've raised within the strategy, particularly what became apparent to me is women in 50s and 60s have become late diagnosis. And one of the key parts we want to do with the strategy is look at how do we provide support, particularly to women, in that capacity as well. So we have, because we absolutely recognise this, and I think what to me was really powerful was because listening to people, I think it's drew out a lot of these issues that have been undercurrents for years. And I'm also going to add in about employees, because actually there is employees of the council and also of the trusts across the city who are also autistic. And one of the key things for me is that I also look at actually how can we become autistic and friendly employers across the city and start to think about what we can do differently to support people who are actually in low employment as part of this.
Thank you, Alexis. I'll just add that underpinning all the work of the strategy and our delivery plan is the development of an autism support hub or drop-in service. The name's going to be co-produced within the next week, but I see that as fundamental to offering support for people while they're waiting across all ages, and also to develop peer support for individuals, which has been highlighted by our board members as being really important to them, because it's a matter of choice as well, whether people, how they want to identify and whether they want to seek that diagnosis, but to get that support while they're waiting, both for women, older women, which we've recognised as an underrepresented group, but also the work that we've done with the children and young people who already give a huge amount of peer support to one another through the education system.
Thank you both. I've got 4 members who've indicated to speak. Councillor Belbin, Perek, Williams and Dale. So I'd suggest to take the final 4 as a round, if that's okay. Councillor Belbin.
Thanks very much for the report. I'm a parent of a young adult with autism, so I do recognise an awful lot of the information in the report. My son was fortunate enough to be diagnosed at the age of 4, so went through the whole of school with a lot of support, actually, from Reigate and through education and through having EHCP, all the way through school, which was incredibly useful. Where things didn't feel very smooth was at the end of that educational experience, where he'd had no support from health or whatever, because that wasn't the issue affecting him. It was education was his key need. And when he finished in education, that transition, it did feel like there was virtually nothing there to support him anymore. So, and, you know, as a relatively well-informed parent, you know, we were able to access some support and help to get him into work and so on. I think looking around for that help into independent living, which is potentially a next step, still feels like an enormous step, if I'm honest. So it'd be really interesting to hear how you think that might look different to a young person, perhaps in a year or two's time, if we embed this strategy.
Thank you. Councillor.
Thank you, and thank you for all of the work of all of the teams on this. It's a really impressive strategy. Obviously, it's a cross-cutting strategy. I wanted to focus from an economic perspective because it talks about more work being needed to support employers to be confident in hiring and supporting autistic people. I know that Opportunity Sheffield has, the council has signed up to the Disability Confidence Scheme. Opportunity Sheffield has done a lot of work with some success to encourage employers to sign up to that. With some success, I was wondering, do you know if there has been an increase in employers already hiring autistic people from that work, or I'm leading to this. Is there a need for more specific consideration from that policy committee to look specifically about autism rather than having the catch-all approach?
Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your report. I was very interested in part of your vision when you talk about to make Sheffield an autism-friendly city through a number of things, including raising the profile of autism in Sheffield. But I was very encouraged when I looked at your themes, and the first key theme, helping people to understand autism. I mean, to me, it's critical to making the life of people with autism so much better that the lucky ones who don't have it understand it, know how to react, how to behave, and I don't need an answer now, but I'd be very interested on a bit more meat on those bones about what your plans are for that. Thank you.
And last but not least, Councillor Dale.
Thank you, and thank you for the report. We have had it at Children's, but just one question that has not dawned on me before, following on from Councillor Williams' comment around educating people on autism, and I'm just wondering, what are we going to be able to do with this when it comes to influencing and supporting the youth justice and the youth offending and criminal justice system? Because actually a lot of our young people that end up in that system have gone undiagnosed, and as we have said, it's hidden in women, but actually in young boys and men it can come across in a different way, and the police and the criminal justice system, I'm not sure whether or not they can cater for that need.
So, first of all, thank you very much for the questions, good questions. So I'm going to ask a couple and I'm going to hand over to Christine. So the youth justice question and probation, let me answer that one first of all, because that came up again at the safeguarding accountability meetings, because I was at the safeguarding accountability meetings, what we look at is all partners approach to safeguarding across the city, and because I was asked for the council and part of the panel, and I'm very alive to this issue, so this was actually one of the questions I asked of youth justice and of the probation service. So it's something that I've asked that we look at a collaborative approach to. And going forward, because I said what we need to think about is actually to be young people accessing youth services, youth justice services, and also probation services who actually have either undiagnosed or have got early diagnosis. And one of the key issues that came up for me was actually around particularly speech and language impacts. So what I've agreed to go and do is I'm going to have a look at that particularly as a link between our safeguarding board and going forward, because I think that's a really important issue. And just as a bit of a side, I actually started my career as a childcare social worker, working youth justice, so I have a sense of the trajectory and the issues, albeit in a different country, But however, so for me, I've agreed to go and look at that as a key priority because I absolutely understand the position there. And then secondly, the bit about transitions, and then I'm going to hand over to Christine. One of the key things that we did a couple of years ago was made an investment into our transition services, because we recognised, again, it was a listening exercise coming into post, was absolutely the impact for the experiences for young people coming into adult services, but also young people leaving education systems. And in some ways, you know, I think about adult services, all routes lead to adult services at some point in time. And so for me, I want to make sure that people's experiences are positive. So one of the things that we did a couple of years ago was put in an investment bid. And that's led to, as a news transitions team, and work in partnership with children's services and with education services, to really look at that coming together in a really cohesive way. And already, just in the last 6 months of implementation, we're starting to see a difference in how we're approaching it, which is good. But we've also reinvested in commissioning support, which is and also in occupational therapy support, because what we recognise is for young people is how do we enable young people to get access to independent living, but also to enable young people to get access to enablement support and to really to live that independent life that they want to live. So that I think we're starting to see the first kind of impacts of that. But for me, one of the key things with transitions, because I know that's a big issue for the city, is we've actually got a further discussion way to happen to look at, to come back to members with further proposals of how we take this to the next stage, so that ultimately we could, for young people, become young adults. They get the best experiences in Sheffield. That's what's really important. So hopefully that helps.
Thanks, Alexis. Yes, I think one of the many positives that's come out of developing this strategy is the relationships we've built with a number of new partners, and particularly touching on transitions. As Alexis has said, within my team we've got 2 very talented commissioning officers who've really built bridges across to children's young people with the social work teams, and we can see the green shoots of progress, I'd say, and there isn't that cliff edge that so many families we've heard about over the years. And it's been frustrating that every summer we hear the same kind of distressing stories of people that are going from children's into adult services and without a clear direction. But we were talking today at Partnership Board about the improved local offer, for example, and I think a lot of what's incorporated in the autism strategy is other strands of work that are being done as well to improve that transitions experience. Councillor Dale talking about the criminal justice proposals as well. Another positive that's come out of developing this strategy is that we've reached out and met new partners as well, both regionally as well as locally, and we're inviting them to join our delivery groups. In terms of employment, Councillor Perek, I was just going to touch on the supported employment project that some of our colleagues in adult social care have been working alongside the DWP, and they are working with a lot of autistic young people, particularly around employment opportunities. And one of the sessions that we're hoping to deliver at the new Autism Support Hub will be around employment, but there will be other opportunities as well to start working alongside employers and raise awareness about reasonable adjustments for people who are autistic who want to move into paid employment. I think that was all the questions covered.
Thank you.
I think there was improving understanding. There was from Councillor Williams, there was the improving understanding, how do we take that forward? And it was actually, we had a really good discussion today actually the Autism Partnership Board about exactly that point. And so what we're going to do is have a revisit about our local offer, what's on our website, but also how do people access our services. And what we've actually undertaken to do through our adult first contact team is, because we are a point of contact for many people across the city, is to actually use that as, and it's actually on the front of the strategy, is to basically is a key, straightforward access point for people, and then we can then redirect to the relevant services, whether it be, you know, children's or adults, or as an immediate kind of support for people who need that kind of straightforward question, what can I do? And because I think that's often what people say, is they actually just don't know where to go to. is that straightforward responsibility. We've undertaken that. And then secondly, looking at what's available on the websites, but one of the key workshops I'm going to have is actually how do we, across from children and young people right through to adults, and for people who actually don't know about the sports as an offer, is actually have a really engaging workshop so that we have, again, not only a practical delivery plan, but that what I would like to see at this point next year is that people can say is actually two things, is actually they know how to get help and support, but secondly, they know what the offer is in Sheffield for people. And it comes back to that kind of practical point transitions. People know that we will deliver upon what we said we would do. And to me, I think that one of my big takeaways at the way 2 years ago when speaking to people was that just lack of trust, because people felt that things weren't delivered upon that people had said were issues. And for me, this whole strategy is about trust. It's about saying, no, we've got a strategy and direction now, but it's also about building trust and saying, actually, we're going to do what we said we would do.
Thank you both. Thank you for the questions. I think that's a really important point to end on, and that trust clearly underpins the kind of collaboration that we need and has led to the development of this strategy, where you're drawing on lived experience but also expertise to inform our work. And I think that's been a thread running through today's meeting and needs to run through the work that we do over the coming year. So thank you very much for your work on preparing this and for the presentation and answers today. The report in front of us contains recommendations for approval. Are we all agreed with those recommendations? Okay. Thank you both. That concludes today's meeting. I know it's been a long one, so your patience is much appreciated, and it's warm in here as well. So thank you, and we will see you 19th of June. That's right.